Everyone knows London society is little more than a well-dressed meat market. Young women parade through glittering ballrooms and silk gowns, dreaming of coronets, while ambitious lords quietly calculate dowries behind polished smiles. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy this peaceful space, please like and subscribe to support us. Now, let's return to our story. Yet, on the most anticipated night of the season, Theodore Ashdown, Duke of Westford, paid no attention to the beauties circling his ballroom floor. Instead, he stood alone in the shadows of the mezzanine balcony, completely captivated by the one woman who wanted absolutely nothing from him. She wasn't reaching for his hand. She was reaching for his brothers. The brothers society mocked. The brothers she treated like a king. The Ashdown House ballroom was heavy with the scent of melting beeswax, crushed lilies, and quiet desperation. Near a towering marble pillar stood Diana Croft, pressing one shoulder against the cool stone as if it were the only thing keeping her steady amid the dizzying swirl of music and dancers. Her corset had been laced just a fraction too tightly, a silent reminder from her Aunt Josephine that she was 22 years old, possessed only a modest dowry, and was rapidly running out of time. The heat from 500 guests crowded beneath 3 magnificent chandeliers was almost unbearable. Silk whispered against silk. Fans snapped open with the crisp, rhythmic crack of musket fire. Diana watched the endless sweep of the waltz, her face frozen into the pleasant, empty smile expected of every unmarried woman. She hated every moment of it. She hated the painted smiles, the rehearsed laughter, the men whose eyes drifted from graceful necklines to family fortunes without missing a beat. "Stand up straight, Diana," Aunt Josephine whispered sharply, never taking her eyes off the dancers. "Lord Harrington is looking this way." Diana didn't move. She knew perfectly well what Lord Harrington was staring at, and it wasn't her slightly outdated pale blue gown. His cold, calculating gaze was fixed on someone else entirely. Near the orchestra, high above the ballroom, hidden in the dim light of the second-floor mezzanine, stood Theodore Ashdown, Duke of Westford. Theo was the architect of this magnificent spectacle, though he looked as if he would rather burn the house to the ground than host another glittering ball. He leaned against the marble balustrade, a half-empty glass of amber liquor hanging loosely from long, tense fingers. Unlike the younger lords, he wore no flashy waistcoat, only severe black evening clothes. His face was carved from hard lines, a sharp jaw, a straight nose, and eyes so dark they resembled bruised iron. He observed his guests with the detached precision of a coroner examining a body. They drank his wine. They whispered about his temper. And they pushed their daughters into his path like carefully prepared sacrifices. Theo understood the game. His way of winning was refusing to play. He remained above it all, untouchable. But he wasn't searching the ballroom for a bride. His unwavering gaze followed only one person, Oliver. 20-year-old Oliver Ashdown possessed the same broad shoulders and impressive height as every Ashdown man. But everything else was different. He slouched. His weight shifted nervously from foot to foot. His cravat was already crooked, and thick dark hair fell untidily across his eyes. Behind elegant fans, the ton whispered that his mind was broken. They said he had the understanding of a 7-year-old child. Loud noises frightened him. Long conversations confused him. Yet Oliver found joy where others never looked. In the deep vibration of a cello. In the sweet taste of lemon ice. In the intricate gears of pocket watches turning beneath careful fingers. Society tolerated him only because of his brother's immense wealth and power. But tolerance is a fragile thing. A thin layer of politeness stretched over cruelty. Theo's fingers tightened around the cold marble railing. He hated bringing Oliver to events like this. He hated watching the crowd instinctively part around his brother as though avoiding something contagious. But Oliver had begged to come. Earlier that afternoon, he had heard the musicians tuning their instruments. He had cried because he wanted to feel the music. Theo had never been able to deny him. He never could. Just stay near the wall, Ollie, Theo thought. Stay quiet. Let them ignore you. But society is rarely satisfied with ignoring weakness. It prefers to entertain itself by tearing it apart. Across the ballroom, Lord Harrington leaned toward a circle of fashionable young gentlemen. They laughed. Their eyes shifted toward Oliver. A slow, ugly smile spread across Harrington's face as he adjusted his cuffs and casually began weaving through the crowd toward the orchestra. Diana saw it immediately. She recognized the direction, the intention. A cold knot tightened deep inside her stomach. The Tun wasn't merely a marketplace. It was a wolf pack, and the wolves had spotted the weakest member of the herd. Oliver swayed gently to the music, completely unaware that an empty circle nearly 5 feet wide surrounded him. His eyes were closed. His large hands tapped happily against his thighs, following the mournful song of the cello. Lord Harrington approached carefully. A glass of dark red punch rested in his hand. He didn't walk directly toward Oliver. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he pretended to laugh with friends, stepping backward inch by inch closer to his unsuspecting target. Diana pushed herself away from the marble pillar. "Diana, where are you going?" Aunt Josephine demanded, grabbing a handful of pale blue silk. "I need some air, Aunt." Without another word, Diana slipped free. She didn't run. Ladies never ran. But her long, determined strides carried her swiftly across the ballroom. She had never met the Duke's brother. She had heard every cruel joke whispered in London's drawing rooms. The Westford idiot. The Duke's burden. But standing here now, she didn't see an idiot. She saw a frightened young man trapped inside a grown man's body. A soul completely exposed to a world that delighted in cruelty. Above them, Theo gently set his glass onto the stone ledge. The soft clink echoed in the silence of his thoughts. He saw Harrington's approach. He knew exactly what was about to happen. The spilled drink, the fake apology, the laughter, the carefully staged humiliation meant to push Oliver beyond his limits. All for the amusement of an audience that had long ago mistaken cruelty for entertainment. Theo stepped away from the railing and disappeared into the shadows of the staircase. He would break Harrington's jaw. He didn't care about the scandal. He would shatter the man's teeth. Before Theo reached the first step, Harrington slammed hard into Oliver. Oliver stumbled forward, his eyes flying open in shock. He caught his balance, but Harrington let out an exaggerated cry. Dark red punch splashed across Oliver's pale gray waistcoat, blooming over the fabric like an ugly blood stain. For a fraction of a second, the music faltered before the cellist hurriedly picked up the tempo again. Silence rippled outward from the center of the collision. Heads turned. Fans stopped waving. "Good God, man," Harrington declared loudly, brushing at his perfectly dry sleeves. "Watch where you're going. You've nearly ruined my coat." Oliver stared at the crimson stain spreading across his own chest. His breath hitched. His large hands hovered over the soaked fabric, trembling. He hated feeling sticky. He hated sudden, loud voices. His eyes darted wildly around the room, panic tightening his throat. He searched desperately for the staircase. He searched for Theo. Behind Harrington, a group of young gentlemen muffled their laughter behind gloved hands. "Perhaps the nursery is missing its favorite pupil," one of them muttered. Theo's boot struck the top step of the sweeping staircase. Blood roared in his ears. Then a flash of pale blue cut through the crowd. Diana. She stepped directly into the empty circle surrounding Oliver. She didn't look at Harrington. She didn't acknowledge the whispering crowd. She placed herself squarely in front of Oliver, shielding him from the laughing faces and gently drawing his attention down to her. "It is entirely my fault," Diana said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried with calm confidence through the stunned silence. She reached into her reticule and withdrew a pristine white lace handkerchief. Oliver blinked at her, his breathing still ragged. "So sticky," he stammered, his deep, gravelly voice contrasting sharply with the fear in his eyes. It's sticky. I know, Diana replied softly. She didn't speak to him in the sugary, condescending tone people reserved for children or dogs. She spoke to him exactly as she would speak to anyone else. Calmly. Respectfully. Punch is terribly sticky. But it hasn't stained your shirt, my lord. Only your waistcoat. Harrington stepped forward, his face flushing with irritation. Miss Croft, I assure you the fault lies with. Diana turned her head. She didn't raise her voice. She simply regarded Harrington with eyes so cold and so utterly unimpressed that the man actually fell silent. Lord Harrington, she said evenly, you appear to have lost your sense of spatial awareness. A few startled gasps escaped from the nearby matrons. Perhaps you should visit the terrace. The heat seems to be affecting your balance. The gasps grew louder. To speak to a gentleman of Harrington's standing in such a manner was social suicide for an unmarried woman. Diana couldn't have cared less. The ink on her future marriage contract could burn for all she cared. She turned her back on Harrington completely, a deliberate, devastating dismissal, and returned all of her attention to Oliver. Slowly, making certain he saw every movement, she reached out with the handkerchief. Gently, she pressed it against the worst of the stain on his waistcoat. Oliver flinched, but Diana didn't pull away. Her touch remained light, steady, predictable. Halfway down the staircase, Theo stopped. His hand hovered over the banister. Hidden in the shadows, he watched the young woman in the outdated blue gown. Miss Diana Croft. A nobody. A wallflower. Every ambitious debutante in London threw herself at his feet. Yet those same women treated Oliver as though he carried a contagious disease. If they acknowledged him at all, it was with thinly disguised disgust, or unbearable pity. But this girl? She wasn't glancing toward the balcony to see whether the Duke had witnessed her kindness. She wasn't performing for anyone. She wasn't looking anywhere except at Oliver's stained waistcoat as she carefully folded the damp handkerchief into a neat square. Better? She asked. Oliver looked down. The cloth was still wet, but it had stopped dripping. He looked back at Diana. The panic in his eyes had begun to fade. In its place appeared something quieter. Curiosity. Yes, he said softly. Thank you. It is cold. It is, Diana agreed with a gentle smile. But the cellos are warm. Oliver blinked. I was watching you from across the room, she continued. You feel the music very deeply, don't you? His face lit up instantly. The transformation was astonishing. Fear vanished, replaced by the open, boyish joy of someone finally understood. Suddenly he was strikingly handsome. The big wooden one, Oliver said excitedly. It rumbles here. He tapped the center of his chest, just above the crimson stain. It makes the floor shake. It does, Diana said, smiling. It was the first genuine smile she had worn all evening. It transformed her face, turning quiet beauty into something unforgettable. I've always believed the cello is the only instrument that truly understands melancholy. Oliver frowned thoughtfully. Melancholy? Sadness, Diana explained, but a beautiful kind of sadness. The orchestra, having recovered from the disturbance, drifted into the opening notes of a slow, sweeping waltz. Around them, the disappointed crowd slowly lost interest. My lord, Diana said, her voice calm and steady, I find myself without a partner for this waltz, and I abhor standing still when the cellos are playing so beautifully. Oliver blinked in confusion. He looked to his left, then to his right, as though searching for the person she was truly addressing. Diana took a small step closer. She extended her bare, ungloved hand. Would you do me the honor of this dance? The silence that settled over the ballroom was absolute. A single pin dropped onto the polished oak floor would have sounded like a gunshot. Even the cellist seemed to hesitate, his bow lingering for the briefest moment on a low, mournful note. Oliver stared at her outstretched hand. His own hands were large and rough, calloused from countless hours spent tending the gardens at the Ashdown country estate, the only place where he was ever truly free. His gaze shifted from her delicate fingers to her face. Panic flickered once more in his eyes. I don't know the steps," he whispered. "Theo says I step on people's toes. I'm clumsy." Diana smiled gently, never lowering her hand. "I am entirely indifferent to my toes, my lord. And a waltz is nothing more than walking in circles. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. If you can count to 3, you can waltz." On the staircase, Theo felt the air leave his lungs. Don't do this, he thought. A dark, cynical fear tightened around his heart. Don't give him hope only to let him fall. If he stumbles, they'll laugh, and it will break him. He wanted to stride down and stop this. He wanted to protect Oliver from the humiliation he was certain would follow. But something held him in place. It was the way Miss Croft offered her hand. Not as a command, not as a challenge, as a gift. Patient, steady, unwavering. Oliver lowered his eyes. He swallowed hard. Then, with agonizing slowness, he reached out. His large, warm hand closed around hers. His grip was far too tight, lacking the practiced grace of a gentleman. Diana didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer, gently guiding him into the proper dance position. She placed his right hand firmly against her waist. "Hold me here," she instructed softly. "Don't let go. I'll guide you." "People are looking," Oliver whispered. His whole body trembled. "Let them look," Diana replied, her eyes never leaving his. "They're only looking because they're bored. They've forgotten how to feel the music. Don't watch them. Watch me. Listen to the cello. 1, 2, 3. The orchestra swelled. Diana stepped backward, gently drawing Oliver with her. He stumbled. His heavy boot landed squarely on the hem of her gown. Silk tore with a sharp, painful rip. A collective gasp swept through the nearest guests. Harrington smirked. On the staircase, Theo gripped the banister so tightly the polished wood groaned beneath his hand. Diana didn't even glance at the ruined hem of her dress. She tightened her hand on Oliver's shoulder, grounding him with a gentle, reassuring touch. "Perfect," she said without hesitation. "A shameless lie. Now your left foot." 1, 2, 3. She shifted her weight, quietly guiding his. Oliver stepped. This time he missed her feet. "Good." Again. 1, 2, 3. Slowly, they began to turn. It was not a graceful waltz. It lacked the smooth, effortless elegance of the ton's most celebrated dancers. Oliver moved like a powerful draft horse thrust into a ballroom, stiff, heavy, and terrified. His eyes remained fixed on his feet, his brow furrowed with fierce concentration. His lips silently counted each step. 1, 3. 1, 3. Yet somehow, they were dancing. Diana held her head high. She refused to acknowledge the curious faces surrounding them. Instead, she kept her eyes on Oliver, speaking in a calm, steady stream of encouragement. "You're doing wonderfully. Feel the turn. Let the music guide you. That's it. 1, 2, 3. Little by little, the violent trembling in Oliver's arm began to fade. The rigid fear locked inside his shoulders slowly melted away. At last he lifted his gaze, past Diana, toward the orchestra. He found the cello. He listened. His awkward, uneven steps gradually settled into the rhythm. He was still heavy, still unpolished, still utterly lacking in refinement, but he had stopped fighting the music. Now, he was moving with it. A small, uncertain smile spread across his face. Then it grew brighter. I'm dancing," he whispered, wonder coloring his deep voice. "You are dancing, Lord Oliver," Diana replied warmly, genuine pride filling her heart. Together they turned through the center of the ballroom. The sea of silk gowns and finely tailored coats parted before them. Not from respect, from astonishment. No one had ever witnessed such a thing. The Duke's supposedly broken brother, the family's greatest embarrassment, was dancing. And his partner, a young woman wearing a torn blue gown, carried herself with the quiet dignity of a queen. From the shadows of the staircase, Theo watched. For years he had wrapped himself in a shell of cold indifference, forged while defending his brother against the world's quiet cruelty. Now, that shell began to crack. He watched Oliver smile. Not politely, not uncertainly, but with pure, unrestrained joy in the middle of a London ballroom. He watched the woman in the pale blue gown bear the full weight of society's judgment without flinching. She absorbed Oliver's awkwardness and transformed it into dignity. Only then did Theo realize he had stopped breathing. The bitter taste of brandy disappeared from his tongue, replaced by something he had not felt in years. Oh, sure. Terrifying, and filled with gratitude. As the waltz rose into its final, soaring crescendo, Diana gently guided Oliver to a graceful stop. She didn't release him immediately. Instead, she waited until the last note faded into silence before stepping back. Oliver's cheeks were flushed. His chest rose and fell with excited breaths. His eyes sparkled with wonder. He looked down at her. "I didn't step on your toes again." "No," Diana said with a warm smile, sinking into a graceful curtsy. "You were a flawless partner, my lord." Oliver answered with an awkward, overly deep bow. When Diana rose from her curtsy, her gaze drifted upward. She hadn't meant to look. It was instinct, a quiet pull she couldn't explain. Her eyes traveled beyond the glittering crystal chandeliers, beyond the whispering guests, toward the staircase. Theo stood there, no longer hidden in shadow. He had descended halfway into the ballroom. He wasn't watching the crowd. He wasn't wearing his familiar mask of cold indifference. He was looking only at her. The distance between them was immense, filled with polite applause, filled with vicious whispers. Yet Diana felt the weight of his gaze as though he stood only inches away. There was no anger in his dark eyes, only an intense, unwavering focus that stole the breath from her lungs. For one suspended heartbeat, the Duke of Westford and the forgotten wallflower held each other's gaze. Then the orchestra burst into a lively country dance. The spell was broken. The glittering meat market sprang back to life, swirling once more with laughter, gossip, and calculated smiles. The carriage ride back to Mayfair was suffocating. For the first 20 minutes, Aunt Josephine said nothing. She sat perfectly rigid upon the worn velvet cushions, her profile illuminated in harsh flashes by the passing street lamps. The silence was heavier than any shouted accusation. It was the silence of a ledger being closed, the silence of a bankruptcy declared. Diana stared down at her lap. Her hands rested over the jagged tear in her pale blue silk skirt. The frayed edges were impossible to ignore, a visible reminder of everything she had sacrificed. The adrenaline that had carried her across the ballroom had long since faded. In its place remained only exhaustion, cold and hollow. "Do you have any idea?" Aunt Josephine finally asked, her voice trembling with tightly restrained fury, "what you've done?" Diana didn't look up. "I prevented an act of cruelty, Aunt. You committed social suicide." Josephine leaned forward, all composure forgotten. Her eyes burned with desperation. "You insulted the heir to the Earl of Danbury. You made a spectacle of yourself with that poor creature. You are 22, Diana. We do not possess the fortune to survive a scandal. We do not possess the family name to make society forget. By tomorrow afternoon, the patronesses of Almack's will strike your name from their lists. We are finished." Diana turned her face toward the rain-speckled carriage window. Outside, London's cobblestones glistened beneath a fine evening drizzle. She knew Josephine was right. Society operated with ruthless precision. One survived through wealth, or through reputation. Diana had just spent the last of hers on a young man who struggled to tie his own cravat. And yet, In the darkness of the carriage, she could still feel the phantom weight of Oliver's trembling hand in hers. She could still see the wonder in his eyes when he realized he was truly dancing. "I'm sorry for the embarrassment I've caused you, Aunt," Diana said quietly, "but I will never regret the dance." Josephine let out a sharp, disbelieving breath and sank back into the cushions. She didn't speak another word for the rest of the journey. Back at Ashdown House, the ball raged on. Champagne continued to flow. Music filled the ballroom. Gossip spread from guest to guest like wildfire. But near the terrace doors, the atmosphere had turned cold. Lord Harrington stood surrounded by his usual circle of admirers, laughing loudly as he retold the evening's events. A fresh glass of punch rested comfortably in his hand. With every retelling, Oliver's awkward steps became more ridiculous, and Harrington's wit became more heroic. He never noticed Theo approaching. Theo did not hurry. He stalked forward. Every movement was calm, measured, dangerously controlled. It was the quiet confidence of a man who had spent a lifetime mastering his own violence. The crowd parted instinctively before him. Conversations died. Laughter faded. Every guest who caught sight of the Duke's face fell silent. Harrington finally noticed the sudden hush surrounding him. He turned. A smug smile still lingered on his lips. It vanished the instant he found Theo standing less than a foot away. Theo was taller, broader. His sheer size was intimidating. But it wasn't his height that made Harrington instinctively step backward. It was his eyes, cold, empty, completely devoid of anger. Because they had moved beyond anger. They held nothing human at all. "Your Grace," Harrington stammered. Theo didn't acknowledge the greeting. Without a word, he reached forward. His movements were smooth, unhurried, deliberate. He lifted the crystal glass of punch from Harrington's hand and held it between them. "A clumsy thing," Theo said quietly. "A spilled drink." His voice was barely above a whisper. It didn't carry over the music. The words were meant only for Harrington, and the terrified men standing immediately behind him. It was an accident, Your Grace," Harrington stammered, a sheen of cold sweat forming across his forehead. "The fellow stumbled into me. He's entirely unpredictable." Theo tilted his head ever so slightly. "My brother is exactly as predictable as I am, Harrington. He simply possesses less restraint." Slowly, Theo opened his hand. The crystal glass slipped from his fingers. It struck the polished oak floor between Harrington's expensive shoes and shattered with a violent crack. Dark red punch splashed across Harrington's spotless white silk stockings and the hem of his velvet trousers. Harrington recoiled, sucking in a sharp breath. The men standing behind him instinctively scattered backward. Theo never looked at the broken glass. His eyes remained fixed on Harrington's pale face. "Your father's shipping contracts in the West Indies are due for renewal next month," Theo said quietly. "They require my signature in the House of Lords. I will not sign them." Harrington's mouth fell open. Every trace of color drained from his face. "Your Grace, please. You cannot punish my family's estate over a trivial misunderstanding at a ballroom." Theo's expression never changed. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a lesson in spatial awareness. His voice remained calm, cold, without emotion. "Consider your season over, Harrington. If I ever see your face at another gathering attended by my family, I will not stop with your father's shipping contracts. I will bankrupt your entire bloodline." A heavy silence settled between them. "Now, leave my house." Harrington swallowed hard. He glanced at the shattered crystal scattered around his feet, then back into the Duke's unblinking eyes. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize again. He simply turned and hurried toward the exit. Behind him, red footprints stained the polished floorboards. Theo watched him disappear. He felt no satisfaction. The fury inside him wasn't blazing fire. It was something colder. A deep, silent lake. Destroying one insignificant lord did nothing to empty it. Slowly, his gaze drifted toward the grand entrance. He followed the path the young woman in the pale blue gown had taken less than an hour before. Diana Croft. He intended to learn exactly who she was. Morning light was far less forgiving than candlelight. It exposed every faded thread in the Croft family's Persian rug, every scratch in the aging furniture, every thin layer of dust the overworked maid had never found time to remove. Diana sat quietly beside the window with a sewing basket resting on her lap. Patiently, she unpicked the torn hem of her pale blue silk gown. The dress would never again be suitable for a ballroom. But if she worked carefully, there was just enough fabric to remake it into a modest day dress. She stitched in silence. Aunt Josephine had retired to her room with a pounding migraine, declaring that they were completely ruined and wishing to remain asleep until the following Tuesday. The house was unnaturally quiet. Then, 3 sharp knocks echoed through the front door. Firm, authoritative, unexpected. Diana paused. Her needle hovered above the torn fabric. They weren't expecting visitors. Respectable callers did not arrive at 10 o'clock in the morning. Certainly not the morning after a scandal that had become the talk of London. The heavy brass knocker echoed through the house. 3 sharp, authoritative knocks. Diana paused, her needle suspended above the thread. They weren't expecting visitors. Respectable callers did not arrive at 10 o'clock in the morning. Certainly not the morning after a social catastrophe. She heard the maid's hurried footsteps crossing the hall. The front door creaked open. Then came the low murmur of a man's voice, deep enough to make the old floorboards seem to vibrate. A moment later, the maid appeared in the drawing room doorway. Her eyes were as wide as saucers. Her cap sat slightly askew. She carried a silver tray as though it contained something explosive. Resting upon it was a single heavy calling card embossed with an elegant family crest. The maid squeaked. The Duke of Westford. Diana stared at the card. Her pulse leaped against her ribs. Slowly she set the sewing basket on the floor. "Show him in, Mary." She rose to her feet. Smoothing the front of her simple muslin day dress, she instinctively reached to tidy her hair. Several loose strands had escaped their pins. She let them be. If the Duke had come to reprimand her for disgracing his family, she would meet him standing. Theo stepped into the drawing room. Instantly, the modest room felt too small. His broad shoulders nearly filled the doorway. His head came close to the hanging chandelier. He was dressed for riding. A dark wool coat, immaculately polished boots still carrying the scent of leather and the crisp morning air. A riding crop rested casually in one gloved hand. He looked every inch the dangerous aristocrat. He stopped several feet away. Without speaking, his dark eyes swept across the faded room, the worn furniture, the sewing basket, and finally settled on Diana. She didn't curtsy. In her own home, the gesture felt unnecessary. Instead, she met his gaze without flinching. "Your Grace." Her voice remained steady, though her hands had gone cold. "This is a highly irregular hour for a visit." "I've never been particularly interested in regular hours, Miss Croft," Theo replied. His voice carried the same deep baritone as his brother's, but where Oliver's held warmth, Theo's had been tempered into steel. "I'm interested in answers." "Answers to what?" "To what you hoped to accomplish last night." Diana's posture stiffened. Her chin lifted ever so slightly. "I hope to stop the son of an earl from turning a defenseless man into an evening's entertainment. Nothing more." Theo crossed the room with slow, deliberate steps. His boots echoed across the polished floorboards. He stopped before the fireplace and turned to face her. "People do not sacrifice their reputations without expecting something in return. In my experience, charity is always a transaction." His eyes narrowed. "What exactly did you hope to gain by attaching yourself to Oliver? Did you intend to attract my attention? To play the martyr? For a heartbeat? The arrogance of the accusation stole Diana's breath. Then anger ignited inside her. Hot, sharp, uncompromising. "You greatly overestimate your importance, Your Grace," she replied. Her voice dropped, becoming as cold and cutting as winter ice. "Your attention was the very last thing on my mind." I saw a frightened young man panic because a vicious coward deliberately spilled a drink on him. I intervened because everyone else in that godforsaken ballroom was too busy staring to offer him a handkerchief. She stepped closer to Theo, completely forgetting the vast social gulf between them. "Do not project the cynical calculations of your peers onto me. I danced with your brother because he heard the cello, and he wanted to dance. If you cannot understand a motive simpler than social climbing, then that is a failure of your imagination, not a flaw in my character." Silence settled between them. The electric. Theo simply stared at her. He studied the angry flush high on her cheeks, the fierce, unapologetic set of her jaw. No one ever spoke to him like this. Men cowered before him. Women carefully measured every word. Yet this young woman, standing in a faded dress, clutching the torn hem she had been mending, was openly challenging him in her own modest drawing room. Something shifted inside him. The cold lake of rage he had carried for years rippled for the first time. "I ruined Harrington," Theo said quietly. Diana blinked, caught completely off guard. "What?" "Last night I made it clear that if he remained in London, I would financially dismantle his family. He left town this morning." Diana absorbed the revelation in silence. Her eyes drifted to the riding crop in his hand, then to the rigid tension in his shoulders. For the first time she truly saw him, not simply as the feared Duke of Westford, but as an exhausted man carrying responsibilities so heavy they had become armor. Armor that was slowly crushing the man beneath it. "That was unnecessary," she said softly. Theo's jaw tightened. "It was entirely necessary. But it doesn't solve your problem. I know exactly how society operates. You publicly humiliated the heir of a wealthy family. You danced with the man society has chosen to reject. By now, you are the subject of dozens of morning calls. And not one of them is complimentary. You will be ostracized." "I know." Her answer was calm, without fear, without regret. Theo took one slow step toward her. The sudden closeness stole Diana's breath. He smelled of leather, fresh morning air, expensive soap, and quiet strength. "I will not allow Oliver's happiness to become the instrument of your ruin." His voice left no room for argument. "Tomorrow afternoon, 3 o'clock, my carriage will arrive for you and your aunt. You will accompany me on a drive through Hyde Park, in an open barouche." At the height of the afternoon promenade, Diana stared at him. A drive through Hyde Park beside the Duke of Westford, in full view of London society, was the highest public honor an unmarried woman could receive. Would be a declaration, a visible sign of the Duke's favor. Every rumor Harrington had spread would be swept away before sunset. The whispers would stop. The invitations would return. Society would think twice before daring to slight a woman publicly acknowledged by the Duke himself. It would make her untouchable. "You do not need to repay my kindness, Your Grace," Diana said, her pride stiffening her spine. "I am not a mercenary." Theo met her gaze. "It is not payment." His eyes darkened for the briefest moment, lingering on her lips before returning to her eyes. "It is a consequence. You chose to bring my brother into the light. Now you must endure the glare. Be ready at 3 o'clock. He didn't wait for her answer. Turning on his heel, Theo strode from the drawing room. A moment later, the front door closed with a heavy, decisive thud. Silence returned. Diana remained where she stood, her heart pounding against her ribs. She realized she had just collided with a force far greater than herself. The drive through Hyde Park became exactly what Theo intended, a carefully orchestrated spectacle. He sat beside her in the open barouche, tall and imposing, speaking only in quiet, courteous murmurs while London society openly stared. The ton watched. They whispered. They wondered. And they understood. Aunt Josephine, miraculously cured of her migraine, looked ready to burst into tears of triumph. But the true revelation came a week later. Not during another carriage ride, but inside the sprawling glass conservatory behind Ashdown House. Theo had invited Diana, and officially her aunt. Although Aunt Josephine was currently fast asleep on a settee in the main house, overcome by the Duke's excellent sherry. This, Theo said quietly, is Oliver's kingdom. The conservatory stretched almost the length of the house. Towering palms reached toward the glass ceiling. Imported ferns filled every corner with lush green foliage. Yet flowers were not the strongest scent in the room. The air carried the smell of machine oil, brass polish, and damp earth. 3 long oak tables dominated the center of the conservatory. Every inch of them was covered with clocks, mantel clocks, carriage clocks, delicate gold pocket watches, heavy maritime chronometers. Some stood fully assembled, ticking together in a strange, uneven chorus. Others lay completely dismantled. Tiny gears, springs, escapements. Each piece arranged with almost surgical precision upon dark velvet cloths. Oliver sat on a high stool at the center table. A leather apron protected his rolled-up shirt sleeves. A jeweler's loop rested against one eye. In his hand, a pair of tiny tweezers moved with astonishing steadiness. The restless young man from the ballroom had vanished. Every movement was calm, focused, certain. Diana stepped beside the table and leaned in with quiet curiosity. She wore a simple yellow dress. Sunlight poured through the glass roof above, catching warm golden highlights in her hair. Several feet away, Theo leaned against a cast-iron support pillar. He watched in silence. "This one," Oliver whispered reverently. Using the tweezers, he carefully lifted a tiny brass gear. "This is the escape wheel. It makes the ticking sound. It stops the spring from unwinding all at once." Diana smiled with genuine wonder. "It's so small." She resisted the temptation to touch it, instinctively respecting his carefully organized workspace. "How do you always know where it belongs?" Oliver removed the loop from his eye and looked at her. "When a clock is broken, it sounds wrong. The rhythm gets sick. I keep looking at the gears until I find the sick part. Then, I make it healthy." Diana's smile softened. "So you're a doctor." 4 timepieces. Oliver's face lit up. A broad, delighted grin spread across his features. "Yes, a doctor." Still smiling, he returned the loop to his eye, and bent once more over the waiting pocket watch. Theo broke this one. Oliver didn't even look up from the watch. He dropped it on a rock. "He's very clumsy." A bright laugh escaped Diana before she could stop it. It was warm, unforced, entirely genuine. Theo felt something tighten unexpectedly in his chest. He pushed himself away from the pillar and wandered toward the table. "I was thrown from a horse, Oliver," Theo corrected dryly. The watch was merely collateral damage. Oliver continued working without lifting his eyes. "Clumsy." Diana looked at Theo, amusement dancing in her eyes. The stern, intimidating Duke who had confronted her in her drawing room seemed strangely absent here. In the warm, humid air of the conservatory, he looked almost relaxed, almost ordinary. "I never imagined your grace possessed such a destructive streak," she teased gently. Theo stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I break many things, Miss Croft. My brother is the only one who knows how to put them back together." The words were spoken lightly, but beneath them lay a truth so heavy it settled over the room. Diana looked up. Theo wasn't looking at her. His eyes rested on Oliver. For the first time, she saw him completely unguarded. The fearsome Duke had disappeared. In his place stood nothing more than an older brother watching the person he loved most in the world. "He is brilliant," Diana said quietly, careful that Oliver, utterly absorbed in his work, couldn't hear. "They call him simple. But there is nothing simple about this." She gestured toward the hundreds of tiny gears arranged with perfect precision. Theo nodded. "He understands systems. He understands machines because machines obey rules. They follow logic." His gaze shifted to Diana. "People frighten him because people have no logic. They smile while they're insulting you. They offer a hand while hiding a knife behind their backs. He cannot understand deception." Diana held his gaze. "And you? Can you?" Theo gave a humorless smile. "I simply assume everyone is holding a knife. It saves time." Something inside Diana ached. Not for the Duke's wealth, not for his burdens, but for the lonely fortress he had built around himself. That must be an exhausting way to live. "It keeps Oliver safe," Theo replied. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The answer came before Diana had time to think. "But who keeps you safe?" The words slipped into the silence. Too personal, too honest. She instantly wished she could take them back. Theo's breath caught. His eyes found hers with startling intensity. He didn't answer. Not immediately. Instead, he searched her face, looking for pity, looking for calculation, looking for manipulation. He found none. Only quiet understanding. "I don't require protection," Theo said at last. His voice had softened into a rough whisper. Diana smiled gently. "Everyone requires safety, Your Grace. Even if it's only one quiet room, where they can lay down their armor. For just an hour." Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. Slowly, almost cautiously, Theo reached across the oak table, carefully avoiding the delicate clockwork scattered between them. His hand hovered for a moment. Then the backs of his fingers brushed lightly against Diana's hand. The touch was barely there, yet it felt like lightning. Warmth rushed up Diana's arm. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. For one suspended heartbeat, the world beyond the conservatory disappeared. Oliver continued working quietly, oblivious to everything except the tiny watch before him. Theo's thumb gently traced the curve of Diana's knuckles. His eyes never left hers. "Perhaps," he murmured softly, "I have simply forgotten what safety feels like. I have just found one." The chaotic ticking of 50 different clocks filled the silence of the conservatory. But for Diana, the only sound in the world was the thunder of her own heartbeat. The social season was a machine, and machines despised friction. By late June, Diana Croft was no longer the ruined wallflower. She had become an anomaly. The Duke of Westford had driven her through Hyde Park twice more. He had sent Aunt Josephine a basket of hothouse peaches. He had stood beside Diana at the opera, his broad frame shielding her from the curious stares, his attention fixed only on the performance, and on the woman standing beside him. But elevation always breeds resentment. The aristocracy could tolerate sudden fortune if it came through an obvious bargain. A young beauty marrying an elderly, wealthy lord made perfect sense. The arithmetic was simple, but Theo was young, powerful, fierce. A man widely believed to be immune to sentiment. Diana was plain, impoverished, and far too outspoken. The equation made no sense, and society despises what it cannot explain. The breaking point came at the Earl of Chatham's summer fete. The celebration stretched across the manicured lawns of his Richmond estate. The afternoon sun blazed overhead, beating down on striped silk marquees and the painfully tight cravats of the gentlemen. Diana stood near the edge of the rose garden, holding a glass of warm lemonade that dampened the fingers of her silk glove. Aunt Josephine had abandoned her to pursue a newly widowed baron near the archery grounds with ruthless determination. Theo was temporarily trapped inside the house. A political conversation with an influential parliamentary ally prevented him from making a graceful escape. Oliver, however, was in the garden. He knelt beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient oak, completely oblivious to the hundreds of aristocrats sipping champagne only a short distance away. He had discovered a colony of stag beetles. Completely fascinated, he gently lifted leaves with a small twig, studying their armored bodies and powerful mandibles as they moved across the earth. Without realizing it, Diana had been watching him the entire time. A quiet, protective habit she had developed over the past month. Inspiring, isn't it? The voice was sweet, almost painfully sweet, but beneath it lay unmistakable poison. Diana turned. Lady Mercer stood only a few feet away. She was a woman in her late 40s, her sharp, predatory features hidden beneath layers of powder that could no longer disguise the lines of age. She also happened to be Harrington's godmother. "The roses?" Diana asked politely. Lady Mercer smiled. "Yes, the blooms are quite lovely this year. But I wasn't referring to the flowers, Miss Croft." She snapped open her fan. The sharp crack echoed like a breaking bone. Her gaze shifted deliberately toward Oliver. "I was referring to the spectacle. The Duke's unfortunate burden." She paused, playing in the dirt like a feral child. Diana's grip tightened around her lemonade glass until her knuckles turned white. "Lord Oliver is observing the beetles. He has a remarkable gift for understanding the natural world." Lady Mercer gave a cold, dismissive laugh. "He is an idiot." The pretense of politeness vanished. She stepped closer. The heavy scent of lavender perfume smothered the fragrance of the roses. "And you're a remarkably clever little opportunist. Do you truly think we don't see what you're doing?" Diana met her gaze without flinching. "I am standing in a garden, madam. I'm not aware of doing anything at all." "You're playing the devoted nursemaid to snare a duchy," Lady Mercer hissed. Her eyes gleamed with malice. "It is a bold strategy. Harrington told me how you publicly humiliated him to defend that creature." Theo was grateful. Naturally, a man protects his own blood. But do not mistake a guardian's gratitude for a man's affection. A cold knot tightened in Diana's chest, but her expression remained perfectly calm. "If you have a point, Lady Mercer, I suggest you make it. The afternoon is rather warm, and your powder is beginning to melt." The older woman's eyes flashed with undisguised hatred. "My point, Miss Croft, is that the Duke of Westford will never marry you. He uses you to soothe his brother. You are nothing more than a human comfort, a toy to keep the boy content, so the Duke may finally know a little peace. And when Oliver grows tired of you, or breaks you as he breaks everything else, Theo will cast you aside, perhaps with a modest pension, but certainly with a ruined reputation. You are merely a temporary convenience." The word struck home. They landed squarely on the darkest fear Diana had never dared speak aloud. Theo was kind, protective, attentive, but he had never spoken of a future, never crossed the invisible line between protector and suitor. He had simply drawn her into Oliver's world and guarded its borders. Before Diana could answer, a deafening explosion shattered the humid afternoon. Near the river, the Earl of Chatham had begun testing the evening's fireworks. One of the mortar tubes misfired. Instead of soaring into the sky, it exploded on the ground with the force of a cannon blast. Guests across the lawn gasped. Several ladies cried out, dropping their glasses. Then, from beneath the great oak, a scream ripped through the garden. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't pain. It was raw, primal, absolute terror. Oliver stumbled backward, his large frame crashing against the exposed roots of the ancient tree. The violent noise had shattered his fragile sense of balance. Diana dropped her lemonade. The glass exploded across the gravel path. She shoved past Lady Mercer, ignoring the woman's outraged protest, and ran. Oliver. But he couldn't hear her. His hands were clamped tightly over his ears. His eyes were wide, unfocused, lost in a storm of panic. He struggled to his feet, slipped on the damp grass, then bolted, not toward the house, not toward safety, away from the crowd, away from the noise, straight into the Earl's towering hedge maze. Within seconds, the walls of green swallowed him whole. Diana didn't hesitate. She gathered the heavy silk skirts of her dress up to her knees and ran after him. The gravel bit through the thin soles of her slippers. Towering hedges nearly 10 feet high closed around her. They blotted out the sunlight and plunged the winding path into a suffocating green silence. Oliver. Diana called again, her voice cracking. Only the sound of her own footsteps answered. The hedge maze was designed to confuse. Its narrow paths twisted back on themselves, splitting in every direction. She turned left, then right. She stopped, straining to hear over the ragged sound of her own breathing. A heavy thud echoed somewhere to her right, the unmistakable sound of a large body colliding with the dense hedge. Diana ran. She rushed through the winding paths, ignoring the sharp branches that snagged her sleeves and scratched her arms. She didn't care about the mud staining her dress. She didn't care about the scandal of a young woman racing alone through a hedge maze. She cared only about the frightened young man trapped inside his own panic. She rounded a sharp corner and froze. It was a dead end. Curled into the darkest corner, pressed tightly against the wall of tangled thorns, was Oliver. He had folded himself into the smallest shape he could manage. His knees were pulled tightly to his chest. His arms covered his head. He rocked back and forth in frantic, uneven motions. Under his breath, he muttered a rapid stream of broken words. None of them made sense. He was completely lost inside the panic. Diana approached slowly. She knew better than to touch him. Right now, even the gentlest touch would feel like an attack. She lowered herself onto her knees. The silk of her dress settled into the damp earth. She paid it no mind. Placing both hands flat on the ground before her, she made herself as small and non-threatening as possible. Oliver. Her voice remained low, steady. The same calm voice she had used on the ballroom floor. He didn't stop rocking. He didn't open his eyes. Too loud. It broke. The sky broke. The sky didn't break, Diana said softly. It was only fire powder. The noise is over now. You're safe. Broken. Broken. Theo. Theo. His voice broke into a sob. He was a grown man, broad-shouldered, strong. Yet in that moment he wept with the helpless fear of a lost child. A sharp ache settled in Diana's chest. She slipped a hand into the pocket of her worn dress. Her fingers closed around a small piece of cool brass. She had carried it with her every day since their afternoon in the conservatory. A simple pocket watch. She had bought it from a street vendor for 3 shillings. It wasn't expensive. It didn't even keep perfect time. But it ticked loudly. She drew it out. Holding it by its short chain, she let it swing gently a few inches above the ground. She said nothing. She simply let the steady rhythm fill the silence. Tick, tick, tick. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Oliver's frantic rocking began to slow. His muttering faded. His broad shoulders shuddered one final time. Then, he cautiously opened one eye. Through the curtain of dark hair, his gaze found the little brass watch. Its polished surface caught the faint light filtering through the hedges. Tick, tick, tick. Oliver stared at it. His voice was barely more than a whisper. Is it broken? No, Diana replied gently. It is working perfectly. The escape wheel is healthy. The clock is exactly as it should be. Listen to the rhythm. Oliver slowly lowered his arms. He leaned forward, his entire attention fixed on the small brass watch. The steady logic of its mechanism, the quiet certainty of gears turning exactly as they should, pushed back the chaos inside his mind. "It's a cheap watch," he said at last. His breathing was beginning to steady. "The gears are rough. They drag." "They do," Diana agreed with a gentle smile. "But they keep moving. They never stop." Oliver reached out. His hand still trembled slightly. He didn't take the watch from her. Instead, he laid his large hand gently over hers, steadying her fingers as he leaned closer. He pressed his ear toward the brass case. Then he closed his eyes. The tension slowly drained from his body. A long, shaky breath escaped his lips. "Healthy," he whispered. At that moment, a shadow fell across the gravel. Diana looked up. Theo stood at the entrance to the clearing. He looked as though he had run the entire way from the house. His immaculate cravat hung loose and torn. His chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. The fear carved across his face was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was the face of a man who had looked into the abyss and expected to lose the person he loved most. He had heard the explosion, forced his way through the terrified crowd, demanded to know where his brother had gone. Someone had pointed toward the maze. He had torn through its winding paths with one terrifying thought consuming him, that he would find Oliver broken. Instead, he found his brother sitting quietly in the dirt, calmed by a cheap brass pocket watch, his hand resting gently over Diana's. Theo looked at her. She was kneeling in the mud. Her hair had fallen loose from its pins. A streak of dirt crossed her cheek. Her silk gown was ruined beyond repair. And in that moment, she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Lady Mercer's cruel words echoed through Diana's mind. A temporary convenience, a human comfort. But looking at Theo now, she saw no calculation, no obligation. Only a man whose carefully built walls had finally collapsed. Theo didn't speak. He stepped into the clearing, dropped to his knees beside Oliver, and pulled his brother into a fierce embrace. Oliver stiffened for only a heartbeat. Then his arms wrapped tightly around Theo. He buried his face against his brother's shoulder. "I've got you, Ollie," Theo whispered. His voice broke with emotion. "I've got you." Quietly, Diana released the pocket watch, leaving it safely in Oliver's hands. She rose to her feet and brushed the worst of the mud from her skirt. Suddenly she felt like an intruder. She was witnessing a moment built from years of fear, years of loyalty, years of love. She turned to leave, to give the brothers the privacy they deserved. She had taken barely 2 steps, when strong fingers closed around her wrist. The grip was firm, unyielding. Diana looked back. Theo was still kneeling beside Oliver. One arm remained wrapped protectively around his brother, but his other hand held her wrist, anchoring her where she stood. He looked up at her. His dark eyes held a depth of emotion that stole the air from her lungs. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His touch said everything. "Don't leave. Not now. Not ever." The Croft drawing room lay wrapped in the deep shadows of late evening. Aunt Josephine had long since retired upstairs with a generous glass of brandy, determined to recover from the exhausting and thoroughly scandalous events of the afternoon. Diana sat in the worn armchair beside the unlit fireplace. She had bathed and changed into a simple faded cotton wrapper, but she still felt hollowed out, utterly drained of adrenaline. When a knock sounded at the front door, it wasn't the authoritative boom of a duke. It was quiet. 2 firm, deliberate taps. Mary, the maid, had already gone to bed. Diana rose, her bare feet silent against the floorboards, and walked into the narrow hallway. She unlocked the heavy oak door and pulled it open. Theo stood on the doorstep. There was no carriage waiting in the street. He had walked. He had discarded his formal coat and cravat. He wore only a white linen shirt, open at the collar, and dark trousers. Stripped of his title's ceremonial armor, he looked somehow more formidable than ever. He didn't ask permission. He stepped across the threshold and quietly closed the door behind him. The small hallway suddenly felt impossibly intimate. "Oel is asleep," Theo said. His voice was low, rough with exhaustion. "I stayed with him until the watch you gave him calmed him." He placed it beneath his pillow. "I'm glad," Diana replied, folding her arms across her chest. She suddenly felt painfully aware of how thin her cotton wrapper was. "He recovers quickly once the noise stops." Theo never glanced at the faded wallpaper or the worn rug. He looked only at her. He took another step closer. "I spoke with Lady Mercer before I left the fete," he said, his tone dangerously soft. Diana stiffened. "Did you?" "Yes. She was quite eager to tell me she'd warned you about my intentions. She informed me you were visibly upset after she explained that I was merely using you to manage my brother." Theo stopped barely a foot away. The warmth radiating from his broad frame chased the evening chill from the narrow hall. "And what did you say to her?" Diana asked quietly. "Nothing. I simply informed the Earl of Chatham that if Lady Mercer were ever invited to another gathering in London, I would purchase every debt attached to his estate and evict him by Michaelmas." Diana caught her breath. "Theo, you cannot keep ruining people because they insult me. There will be no one left in London." "I do not give a damn about London," he growled. He closed the final inches between them. He still didn't touch her, but he stood so near that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I care about what you believed." His voice softened. "Did you believe her?" Diana searched his face. For the first time she saw it. Fear. Not anger. Not arrogance. The raw, bleeding fear of a man who had never trusted another soul enough to expose his heart. "I was afraid she might be right," Diana admitted in a whisper. "I have no fortune. No powerful family. On paper, I make no sense for a man like you. You protect Oliver so fiercely. It seemed possible that you simply needed someone to keep him calm." "Guard dog." Theo closed his eyes. A sharp, ragged breath escaped him. When he looked at her again, the cold, cynical Duke of Westford had vanished. "I am a selfish, ruthless bastard, Diana," he said quietly, his voice trembling with terrifying honesty. "I have spent my entire life building walls thick enough to keep the wolves away from my brother. I assumed everyone was a wolf." His gaze never left hers. "Then you stepped onto that ballroom floor. You ruined your dress. And you walked straight through the stone walls I had spent a lifetime building." At last Theo raised his hands. He didn't seize her. Instead, he reached out with excruciating slowness, his large, calloused palms gently cupping her face. His thumbs brushed softly across her cheekbones. "I am not using you to pacify him," Theo whispered. He leaned forward until his forehead rested against hers. "I am terrified of you." His voice was barely audible. "Because before you, if I fell, only Oliver suffered." He drew a slow, unsteady breath. "But now if I fall, I lose everything." His eyes searched hers. "You are the only thing in my life I never calculated. The only thing I simply wanted." The cold knot that had lived in Diana's chest dissolved, replaced by an overwhelming rush of warmth. The rules of the tongue. The endless whispers. The absence of a dowry. Every reason she had found to doubt herself disappeared beneath the desperate honesty in his voice. "Then stop calculating," Diana whispered. She lifted her hands into his thick, dark hair and gently drew him closer. Their kiss was nothing like the restrained, practiced greeting society approved of. It was two guarded hearts finally meeting. Years of loneliness, fear, longing, hope. Theo let out a quiet, trembling breath as his arms wrapped around her waist, holding her close. He kissed her with the tenderness of a man who had spent a lifetime denying himself comfort. Every burden he had carried, every lonely night, every silent sacrifice, it all seemed to melt away. Diana answered with the same quiet certainty that had led her across the ballroom to Oliver. She steadied Theo exactly as she had steadied his brother, not with pity, but with unwavering strength. When they finally drew apart, both breathing heavily, Theo kept his arms around her. He rested his chin lightly against the top of her head and closed his eyes. "Marry me," he murmured into her hair. It wasn't merely a proposal. It was surrender. Diana smiled against his chest. On one condition. Theo leaned back just enough to meet her eyes, one dark eyebrow lifting. "Name it." Oliver builds every clock in Ashdown House. A gentle smile curved her lips. "Every one of them. I want to hear them ticking." Theo stared at her for a long, silent moment. Then, for the first time since she'd met him, the Duke of Westford threw back his head and laughed. A rich, deep, utterly genuine laugh echoed through the narrow hallway, chasing away years of silence. "Done," he said, pulling her back into his embrace. "The house will be deafening." "No," Diana corrected softly. She rested her hand over his heart. Beneath her palm, the frantic rhythm of his heartbeat gradually slowed. Steady. Even. Certain. It will simply be perfectly on time. Did Diana and Theo's story capture your heart? This is what happens when you strip away the glittering facade of high society and focus instead on the deep, messy, and beautiful truth of human connection. If you enjoyed watching a forgotten wallflower bring both a formidable duke and his beloved brother into the light, don't forget to like this story, share it with someone who loves heartfelt historical romance, and subscribe for more original tales. And tell us in the comments, what was your favorite moment between Diana, Theo, and Oliver? Thank you for reading, and we'll see you in the next story.